Rain hammered down on the city that night, turning the streets into glistening mirrors. At the airport, chaos reigned as passengers hurried through security with drenched coats and impatient voices. Somewhere among them, a man moved differently, slower, tenser. Under the tailored black suit and calm expression was a hunted man. He was a CEO known for being ruthless, the kind of person whose name could crash markets, and now someone was trying to erase him. A deal gone wrong, billions lost, powerful enemies made. A bullet had grazed his side an hour earlier, and every step sent sharp pain cutting through his ribs. When the gunman lost sight of him near the cargo bay, he seized his only chance. There were rows of suitcases waiting to be loaded onto connecting flights. He slipped into an oversized travel case, belonging to one of his own company's couriers, voice steady as he ordered on the phone before losing reception. "Keep the car ready, I'll get through customs unseen." The zipper closed over him just as sirens wailed outside. His breathing shallow but controlled. Mechanical sounds surrounded him, doors slamming, luggage belts humming, voices barking through radios. Then the world tilted and everything went dark. He tried to stay conscious, counting seconds, but blood loss made the air spin. He didn't know that somewhere across the handler's chaos, another identical suitcase, same brand, same color, sat beside a young woman waiting for her bus. Her clothes were cheap and soaked from the rain, her hands red from carrying laundry for the older neighbors she helped at night. She hated the rain, but she loved small chances. This delivery job at the terminal paid enough to help her rent another week. When the belt jammed and an attendant shouted for help, she grabbed what she thought was her client's case and ran for the exit before the last bus left. By the time she reached her small apartment, thunder shook the windows. She dragged the heavy suitcase across the floor, muttering about rich people packing too much. When she unzipped it to check the contents, a hand slipped out. She screamed and stumbled backward. Inside, half folded against his knees, was a bleeding man in a black suit, barely conscious. For a moment, she thought he was dead. Then his head turned slightly and a hoarse voice murmured, "Please don't call anyone." Panic and pity tugged at her at the same time. He tried to sit up but collapsed again, one hand clutching his side. She fetched a towel and water without thinking, adrenaline and disbelief guiding her. He accepted the help quietly, his breathing slowing as she pressed the towel to the wound. Only when he looked up did she realize how strange it felt to meet the eyes of someone who didn't belong in her world. His voice was rough but steady when he asked where he was. She told him the name of the building. "No one ever comes here," she added. "You're safe." He stayed silent for a while, staring at the ceiling as though reminding himself what safety even meant. The storm outside softened to drizzle. She wrapped his wound carefully with strips of cloth torn from an old shirt. When she was done, he said thank you in a tone that sounded as if he'd forgotten how. She shrugged it off, telling him she'd find a way to get him real help in the morning. He shook his head once. "No hospitals, no police." She frowned but didn't push. Morning came gray and quiet, the sound of traffic dragging in from the street below. The girl woke with a start, remembering the stranger on her couch. He was still there, asleep now instead of unconscious, one arm flung over the side. The soaked dress shirt peeled away to reveal layers of taped bandages she'd wrapped the night before. Sunlight cut across his face, softening the sharp lines that had frightened her earlier. She stood for a long moment trying to decide whether to call someone, then shook her head. Something in her gut told her that calling anyone would only make things worse. For him, and probably for her too. She started boiling water for tea, and the smell brought him awake. He blinked, his eyes finding hers immediately. For a second, neither spoke. She handed him the tea without a word. He took it carefully as though the gesture might vanish if he moved too quickly. "You didn't throw me out," he said finally. She shrugged. "Didn't have the energy." He smiled faintly, pain flickering at the edge of his expression. He asked her name, and when she told him, he repeated it under his breath like it was something rare. He didn't offer his. She noticed but didn't ask. He ate the bread she gave him, every movement deliberate. Only after a while did she ask what had happened. He didn't lie exactly, but his words stayed vague. "Wrong people. Wrong place. Someone wanted me gone." She saw that was all he would admit. By afternoon, the bleeding had stopped. He tried to stand, but failed, gripping the table for balance. She caught his arm before he tipped forward. scolding him under her breath, and he laughed, a small, rough sound that surprised them both. It had been years since she'd laughed with anyone either, and the sound of it made the tiny room feel larger. He asked how long she'd lived there, and she told him since her mother died, working odd jobs, filling holes people left behind. "You help strangers," she said simply, "because someday you might need a stranger to help you." They fell quiet again. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, weak but steady. He glanced at the window and then back at her. He promised that once he could walk, he'd leave, that none of this would land on her shoulders. She looked away from him, pretending to focus on the kettle, but her fingers tightened around the handle, because she already knew that when he left, the room would feel like it had lost something she didn't know she was looking for. By the third day, the swelling in his side had faded to a dull ache, and he could move around her small apartment without support. He insisted on helping, sweeping the floor, fixing the broken latch on her window, anything that gave his hands purpose. She teased him that he had no idea how to hold a broom properly. He answered with mock seriousness that he learned fast when the teacher was this relentless. The exchange made her laugh again, light and quick, and the sound stayed in his ears long after it faded. Each hour inside that cramped room worked at the edges of the life he had built. He kept imagining the offices he used to rule, the glare of conference lights, the silence of bodyguards who flinched at his commands. Here he was just a man in rolled-up sleeves, cooking eggs with a girl who hummed to herself while waiting for water to boil. Every night she asked cautiously if he should contact someone, a doctor, a family member, the police. Each time he said not yet. He had enemies, he explained softly, and until he knew who had set them on him, he couldn't risk being found. She didn't fully understand, but she accepted it the way she accepted weather, something beyond her influence. He noticed that about her. She didn't fight what she couldn't change. She simply adjusted, made space, turned struggle into routine. Little things she said began to stick in his mind. When she burned her hand on a pan and laughed instead of cursing, she told him pain just meant you were still alive to feel it. When the power flickered during a storm, she lit candles without swearing at the darkness. He found himself watching her more than he should, memorizing gestures, the shine on her cheek when she looked up from washing dishes. One evening, his phone buzzed with a hidden number. He turned his back to the room, listening. A low voice confirmed what he feared. There had been an insider. The deal he'd built had collapsed, and his name was being erased piece by piece. Everything he owned was being swallowed by rivals who thought he was already dead. When he hung up, she was standing in the doorway. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she said quietly. Not a question, but a fact. He started to nod, but stopped. "I should, but I don't want to," he admitted, the words strange in his mouth. She looked at him, trying to understand how a man with power could sound so uncertain. He took a slow breath, then smiled in that weary way that made her heart hurt. "You found me when running meant dying. Maybe that's worth staying for." She didn't answer, but she didn't tell him to go either. The storm outside cracked once, deep and long, and neither moved until the thunder faded. He stayed a few more days, enough time for his body to heal and for the life he had known to feel far away. She grew used to the quiet sound of his footsteps against the floor, the smell of coffee in the morning that he insisted on making, the strange comfort of another heartbeat in the same space. He checked the news one evening and saw his company's logo vanish from the markets. Enemies had divided it up like scavengers, and the world had already adjusted to his absence. It startled him to realize that the panic he expected never came. He watched her repair a tear in her curtain, sewing neatly by the window, and thought, maybe loss wasn't an ending if it led him here. When he finally left to get answers and try to rebuild, he promised to return. He meant it, but neither of them knew if the world would allow it. He returned weeks later without a car, without security details, just a small suitcase full of essentials. The crises had settled. He had rescued what mattered to keep his name alive. His enemies were gone, but so were the luxuries that separated him from everyone else. The first thing he did was climb the narrow stairs to her apartment and knock softly. She opened the door without surprise, like she had expected that sound every night since he'd left. He said her name once, and she stepped aside to let him in. They didn't talk much. There weren't enough words for everything that had changed. He showed her the thin scar at his side, almost healed. She set a cup of tea, on the table and told him she had found work-stitching uniforms at the factory down the street. He ran his fingers along the chipped rim of the cup and told her about the silence of boardrooms when his chair sat empty, about how money had never bought the peace he found in that tiny room. She folded her hands and listened, same as always. Then he said quietly that his world had fallen apart so that he could see what it was made of, and she was the only piece that would not break. For a long while they just sat there letting the noise of the street filter in through the half-open window. He reached across the table and she let him take her hand. There was no promise between them, no speech, just understanding. Suspended in the evening, air, two people from different worlds tied together by chance and something softer. Outside, the city lights flickered on, hiding the scars of another storm, and the man once called untouchable felt, for the first time, exactly where he belonged.